Welcome everyone to another episode of our Game Design of the Month series, where for each episode we talk about a game, break down its design, and what we think about it and its impact. Joining me, my co-host, Tomo Moriwaki, and I, where for this episode we're going to be talking about the latest kind of indie roguelike hit, Balatro. And hopefully I think that is maybe the correct pronunciation of it. That seems to be the one everyone seems to be going with.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I somehow, because of the way I speak, I do prefer saying Balatro instead of Balatro, but
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea.
We're going to probably be saying it like 10 different times in like the next hour for the people watching. But yeah, this is going to be an interesting one. So I know we did one on Slay the Spire, like I think a few years ago, and Balatro seems to be like the new like deck building like hotness. A lot of people have been covering it. A lot of people have been streaming it and talking about it.
Yeah, and I feel like there's something really sort of important about its structure. By taking on the sort of poker math,
Mm-hmm.
um, for basically some kind of an internally consistent sort of mathematical arrangement of things that one or we already most people or many people know all the rules of, and it doesn't have anything else in a lot of ways other than the way it remixes through upgrades and unlocks the kinds of things that can happen inside of that math. Of course, uh Balatro's got, you know um five of a kind flushes and such that doesn't is otherwise not possible. Five of a kind at all, actually.
Mm-hmm. And that's again like one of the things I was showing the game to a family member though, and they're like, "Oh, you're just playing poker." I'm like,
It's
"No,
like, oh
not
no.
really, no." Like, and then this is a flush house, and like, wait, there's no such thing as that.
Exactly.
It is such a brilliant concept for a game. I know in interviews, I would love to talk to the developer, but I think they're going to be swamped for a long time.
I can
They
only
were
imagine.
saying that they were inspired by Luck Be a Landlord. Did you have a chance to try
Ah,
that one?
interesting. No, I haven't played it, although I did play a decent amount of swords and poker way back in the day.
Hmm. And with Luck, like part of the idea of it was again this idea of streamlining a lot of the choices that come with a deck builder. In it, you obviously, excuse me, as my voice is dying, you obviously don't have complete control over what cards you get, or in that game, what slots you get. But the idea is that you're taking enough things that you're trying to minimize randomness. And it's a very like weird take with Balatro, because normally for a lot of roguelikes or a lot of deck builders, you start out with a very standard strategy. Every, Slay the Spire, every monster train, you have a predefined list of cards. And then the idea is you're introducing randomness by, okay, I want to add in this card, I want to add this faction. In this game, it starts out very chaotic simply by the fact that you don't have like really any build at the start. You start with the same 52 cards, but those 52 cards are pretty much worthless unless you start making something happen. And we'll be talking a lot about randomness, I think, throughout this video. But therein kind of lies that challenge of this game is that how do you survive from beginning to middle, and then how do you inherently try to break the game from middle to endless?
Yeah, and I think that's why they actually have the deck unlock progression, right? That's the system that allows them to add modifiers that vary, right? That then put walls up in terms of the kinds of strategies that are more or less likely. And then
Mhm.
that combined with your expertise developing in terms of how to constrain randomness starts to become like a sort of like it's like a dynamic strategy finder is the gameplay, right? And then once you
Mhm.
found your strategy, then you gas that pedal and then you look for optimizations as you go. Of course, you have to keep escalating your power unless things get lucky and you're like spitting out 100K in a hand early on, which obviously is only happens if you're very lucky. But it also leverages very lucky, right? I think in Slay the Spire conversation, we really, one of the things that help make it such a juicy product is that sometimes randomness is busted and you can get
Mhm.
numbers that are completely outrageous and it feels great.
Yep. And the game does like that very similar like thing that I remember from like Peggle back in the day, where in Peggle when you get about to win, you get Ode to Joy playing. It's an amazing moment. This game does this by having like the flame effects. When you know that your hand is out completely out of this world, it's gonna beat whatever the blind is. You see like the little flames rising up, and again, there's a lot of very like subtle design about Balatro that again, if we ever get a chance to talk to developer, I need to ask them if like this is their first take on roguelike design because there's a lot of like smart detail in this one.
Yeah, I mean, they have to be familiar with the kind of like true underlying foundation of it because it's really just too well put together, right? You don't
Hmm.
it's you can randomly do a few things, but you cannot randomly align many things.
Yeah, and like to the point about kind of like the Jokers and their build, like it's another really great idea to again like add this kind of roguelike nature to poker. That again, I was like showing this to my family. Like, okay, so this card gives me times 10 multiplier because I have spades, and like, but why? Because that's what this card does. And I like there's a like here's a thought I guess for you and for anyone watching this recorded. Do you think people who play poker or people who play deck builders resonate more with Balatro? Because it feels like if you come at this strictly from a poker standpoint, you're going to get your butt handed to you almost every single time. Like, you cannot divorce the roguelike deck building progression from this game.
Well, as long as you can take your poker experience and push its limits, I think poker's a pretty good starting point, especially for someone that hasn't played these kinds of games, right? Obviously, the deck builder people who are very comfortable with like the genre, I think that they are able to see kind of the long-term play experience with a lot more clarity because
Mm-hmm.
you know once you've played 100 rounds or more, you really should be thinking certain thoughts that have a lot to do with kind of breaking systems.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the poker mentality there's a certain conservatism in terms of probabilities that the poker mentality institutionalizes, which might take some unlearning to really, excel in Balatro.
Mm-hmm. And with like the kind of like rules the game has, again, it's a really I think this is going to be a really great study for people in terms of I guess like how the individual tags can add up to just crazy amounts of strategies. This Joker enhances all hearts cards. So now I get another Joker that let's say every time a card gets enhanced, it multiplies the enhancement. And I get another one that copies the Joker next to it. And then all of a sudden you can have runs where you can just have your high card just get like 100,000 or a million chips
Yeah,
just by just playing one card a turn.
totally, totally. Although that's a nice position to be in when just high card produces tons of points. Um, no, I think that I totally agree. I think that Bala- Balatro might be sort of the best kind of pure mathematical expression of roguelite
Mm-hmm.
that maybe has ever been made. There are no other mechanics other than the numerical interrelationships of the cards and their modifiers. I mean, there's a little bit of just raw sort of memorization in terms of understanding what the tarot cards can do. And obviously that has this huge effect on things. So like chasing tarot cards won't make sense to someone until they understand the potential power of the tarot cards, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like, there probably isn't a strategy where, oh, I want to just stack up on jacks, but there's definitely a strategy where I might want to stack up on twos or eights, and that takes a little bit of getting used to.
Mm-hmm. And like as you said, the fact that it's all filtered through like the language of poker or language of playing cards makes it far easier to parse compared to say a monster train, where you can have a
Oh,
card that okay, this card boosts the regeneration rate of all wax characters and gives them 2/2.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Like again, like to someone who plays Monster Train, it sounds like I'm just speaking something very simple. To someone else, I might as well be talking in Latin when I just said
It's
that.
nonsense. It's literal nonsense, right?
Mm-hmm.
um, Yeah, no, I think that's part of the genius of it, right? And oftentimes I'll measure sort of how a game is doing based on how much my Steam friends list is playing, right? And I've not seen, well, granted, I see Balatro and Helldivers kind of behaving sort of similarly on my Steam's friends list.
Mhm,
Um, kind of reminded me, it's like a baby version of when Vampire Survivors came out. I'm like, wow, that person's playing Vampire Survivors too, and that person, and that person, and that person, and they're all totally different from each other, and they're all putting a lot of time in. I'm like, okay, well, here it is. I'm
mhm,
buying it right now.
yep. And at some point, maybe we should do Helldivers too. It's see if we can get
Absolutely,
someone for that one. Yeah, and yet
Helldivers 2 is so good.
I haven't played it yet. I played the first one though.
It is nothing
Yeah,
like the
that's
first one,
what I've been
other than
saying.
that the developers' sensibilities in terms of hysterical and hilarious friendly fire is still in the game.
and I,
Magica was, I think, a really important game, and I think a lot of people have forgotten about it by now, but it was huge.
yeah, that would be another one I would like to talk about because again, like as you said, like I remember when like people couldn't stop talking about like that was like kind of like the new hit game, and it was one of those ideas that it felt like something like burgeoning to like greatness, and I don't think they
Totally.
ever quite like tapped it further in terms of that original concept.
No, they needed to, like, I think that it was so successful, well, not to make this a stream about, Arrowhead,
Mhm.
um, but,
Mhm.
um But yeah, they were, I think Magica 1 was so successful that Magica 2 had to be an incremental change, and I think
Mhm.
that slowed them down a little bit, but once they got Helldivers going, they were back on whatever awesome track that their development process was on, and then Helldivers 2 is this huge change. By the
Mhm.
way, Magica 1 has the funniest expansion pack for a game that has ever been made. They have a game, right, called Magica, and it's about mages and casting spells and combining elements, and the first expansion pack is called Magica Vietnam and adds an M60. I don't know if you can get any funnier than that.
Mhm. I've watched that trailer like 100 times. Of hey, it's gonna be wizards, and now we're going to Vietnam, and then Surfing
Dude,
Bird kicks in.
it's like the Geico of expansion packs.
And yeah, oh man, we're gonna have a lot. We gotta be careful. We'll be here for like 5 hours if we start talking about like
But
match.
uh, let's do a round table about Arrowhead's progression to Helldivers 2, and then maybe make half of it about Helldivers 2. I think that'd be a great talk.
Mm-hmm. And to bring us back to Balatro, I was looking at the store page for it just to see like kind of how the game was being marketed. And I really like kind of like how they've set this up in terms of, endless possibilities. This is actually a really good store page, like to actually review as well. But I love the section that is just break the game. Like it's telling you on the store page, front and center, you're supposed to destroy this game. And I think that's one of the things that for a lot of roguelikes and roguelites kind of gets lost in the conversation where and I had this discussion with Edmund McMillan a few years ago about the Binding of Isaac that some I think developers are kind of afraid of that spikiness. That if I get penta shot meets tri shot meets rapid fire, I'm just shooting like 15 bullets a second across the screen, destroys the entire run. Bing bang boom, the game's over, big deal. But then there's like the opposite, where some developers make it so restrictive. Like, okay, you can only have two abilities, and they can't be like anything corresponding because we don't want to see that kind of wowness. And Bellagio, I think they're just like, do the wow, do it.
Yeah, I think that you can think of it as two ends of a spectrum, right? And
Mm-hmm.
on one end, if the needle's clamped all the way, that the game is just promoting uh, the 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 breakdown of their rules set, right? And supportive of this sort of really out, like almost like idle game level of exponential potential expansion and spikiness. Um, at the same time, I think there are many valid reasons not to do that, depending on the kind of game you have. Right? I think if,
Mm-hmm.
like, for example, if Destiny 2 were to allow that to occur, they'd actually lose some of their players because they would end up getting that once in a lifetime experience of extreme power and then never ever be able to get close to it again, and that would kind of put a damper on just too many sessions of play, and then they might find something else to play. Right? Destiny 2 might be among the better examples of a highly disciplined game that does not get too crazy, and even still, it does get a little crazy. Right? The totally meta loadouts with players that have put enough time in, that have everything they need. It's still a little crazy for them, and that's with a development approach that is, we're not going to let you have anything. Where
Hmm.
you got to earn every bit of it, and we don't agree with like a 10x change in outputs as a result of a lucky combination. And then
Hmm.
Balatro on the total other end of it is like, if you don't get a little bit of that, you can't win. And sometimes you'll get so much that nothing makes sense.
Yeah, at some point numbers just lose all meaning. Like, okay, I go from 100,000 chips to now 1811
Totally.
or 47 quintillion.
And we might want to say that roguelike games accommodate that kind of, one way of saying it is sloppiness, but the other way of saying it is sort of contrast, right? In terms of
Hmm.
intense, spiky moments that are very memorable and definitely feel very good. That the roguelike game with a little bit of effort is a really good matrix upon which to have that experience, right?
Hmm.
Whereas, like for example, like playing a Call of Duty campaign mission, on the other hand, gets ruined by that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Not that anyone cares about Call of Duty campaign missions, I guess.
Yep, and that is again like what makes it very tricky to kind of break down. Like with something like Destiny or like any kind of like linear game, you have to take into account like the balance of the world. If you know that an enemy has 800 life points or 800 health, then giving players weapons that do 15 trillion points is not really going to do much. And again, it's like kind of like I'm not sure how to phrase it. It's like kind of like the I guess like as you said, like maybe it's like more about being like stifled on one end and being just completely unfettered on the other
Yeah.
hand. And again, like the brilliance of a roguelike is that the runs are designed to facilitate this. When you start a run, anything can happen. If you're playing an 8 to 10 hour long single player game, you're expecting the story or whatever the mechanics to kind of guide you progression wise from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4.
When there's lots of small sessions, and that the ones that don't work out are the shortest ones, it's kind of this perfect design experience for mitigating when it doesn't happen,
Mm-hmm.
and saying, "Hey, it's awesome when it does." It's I think more and more, as we kind of go forward in the timeline, the roguelike genre is sort of finding its connections to some of the idle games, excitement at spikes, and then taming it in a set of rules, and then Balatro just being a really sort of easy to analyze version of it, right? Because you have the cards and their relationships, you have the jokers, and you have like the well, you also have the planet cards, but the planet cards are just sort of like a more of a linear progression thing, right? Let's get certain hands just spitting out more points, whereas the tarot cards are their own system of sort of complexity and sort of bespoke impact on the kinds of things that you might be chasing after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to the point about kind of like the math behind Balatro, that's another I think very subtle brilliance of this kind of game, in that a lot of deck builders or a lot of roguelikes in general can make it very hard to understand when a run is about to go south. We've played plenty of these games where it's like I win, I win, I win, I win, and then I just lose. And okay, what happened? Like it goes from instant win to instant lose. In this game, because it's this kind of scale of progression with the numbers involved, it's easy to see. Okay, if I'm only doing 16,000 chips, and the blind is now 120,000 chips, the math is not going to add up there. And it's
Yeah.
very easy to kind of break down, okay, well, maybe I should have gone more multis, or maybe this run I just didn't get any good jokers. And I think that kind of lends itself really well to keeping someone engaged in this game more, I think far longer than we see from other roguelikes. And in kind of an analysis I put up for it, I compared Balatro to Hades, Because I felt Hades
Right.
was like the last example of very mainstreaming a roguelike.
Yeah, that's a pretty good analogy too. It's also, Hades has this really well-tuned progression scheme, right? The time you put in, even if you're the worst, is going to get you some results,
Hmm.
and it's not too slow. But the time it takes to get some of that progress is usually enough time to start learning the skills with the action combat sequences, which then makes you have more fun in the rooms that get selected that you don't like. And so on the runs where you don't get the right god and you don't get the right configuration of rooms, you're still kind of
Hmm.
optimizing the really, really, really well done action mechanics. And then you learn a better relationship with the selections you have at your disposal to try to extend those runs. It's so well put together. I mean,
Hmm.
Balatro working with has simplified its space relative to Hades because Hades is out of this world in terms of taking complex things and pulling them together.
Hmm.
But you know what? I might agree that they are sort of equivalent in their level of quality in terms of handling the roguelike experience.
Hmm. And I guess as a question for you, like, what do you think about kind of the Joker designs in this? Because I think again, like, it all really is like very advanced, like deck building elements with how the Jokers kind of interact with each other, what you're able to do with them. The whole difference between getting Jokers that give you chips versus those that give you multis, and so far in the, I don't even know how long I've been playing this game for. Let me check Steam really fast. I have been playing Balatro for about almost 25 hours so far, and I have gotten one single legendary Joker in that entire time. But what do you think about kind of like how the Joker designs work?
It's interesting, it's sort of hard for me to say without watching a range of other people play, but I know from my own experience, it felt like a pretty clean learning curve, right? You'd get jokers at first, and you look at them, and they just be total nonsense, and you have no idea what they're going to do. So you just pass on those, and then early game jokers are lower multipliers or coin acquisition, and they make more sense, and you start using them and feeling them out, and then you'll get other jokers, and then sometimes those more complicated jokers will start to make sense in the context of the jokers that you have, so now you start trying them out. I actually got 3 legendary jokers in one run because I kept getting the soul gem tarot cards, so I unlocked a bunch in a single run, and it wasn't even a single run that I did well. It just was some really weird happenstance with the tarot cards. But I got one where it repeatedly consumes the Joker to its right and takes its sell cost, doubles it, and adds it to its multiplier. That
Hmm.
was that that was worth a lot. I think I
Hmm.
got that multiplier up to like 52 by the time I ended that run.
Hmm.
But yeah, I
Yeah.
think that the Joker progression it probably like I haven't put enough hours in necessarily either. If I had like a couple hundred hours into it, I could probably just say it. But right now, I don't see it entirely yet. But I could imagine that the process of learning the ropes of the Joker system is well crafted. It's that right? There's a challenge in that it's a big pool, a flat pool in some ways, minus the ones that aren't currently unlocked of functionality, right? And so, in that pool of jokers, there are jokers that require much more advanced understanding of the game to make sense of, and then there are the jokers that are simple. So I can randomly get the ones that make no sense to me, but the ones that are simple, they do make sense. And as I play, probably the first 10 hours probably really important that I get like a basic understanding, and I felt like that worked really well. And now I'm sort of in this like on the lookout for sort of later strategies with some of the ones I don't understand. I mean, of course, there's like the DNA card, which I think anytime that shows up, immediately puts you down this strategy of three of a kind, full house, or flush houses, or flush four of a kinds, right? Because you can just start generating cards. Um, and really taking control of how of what your deck is like. I think the first time I won or completed out to ante 8, I that was a key piece of the infrastructure.
Hmm. Yeah, and with and I also like the DNA card myself, and I think that's again is another really great thing about this game is that there's like I was thinking about this last night. There's essentially two ways of playing Balatro. You can play it to ante 8, get a build, usually maybe some commons, maybe a few uncommons, and call it a day. But if you really want to push into endless, then we get into like the super detail. Okay, I'm going to make sure I get the right rare, align with the right multi. I'm going to, I'm essentially going to remove randomness completely from my deck. I will make this deck entirely all hearts or all tens, jacks, whatever, all face cards. And then again, it just turns into this just like math machine of numbers.
It's crazy. Yeah, you're funny enough, once you actually get there, the play experience is much less interesting because
Mm-hmm.
you know exactly what you're going to do. You're like discard, 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 discard. Nope, discard, 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 discard. Nope, discard, 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 discard. Got it. Play. Done. Next. And you do
Mm-hmm.
that over and over again until, oh, wait a second, my number isn't getting high enough. I'm gonna be booted out soon because I think my build can't go any further.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, like the endless mode is such, I think, a really great concept for this kind of game. This idea that you can keep playing beyond like the what's I guess considered like the story or the campaign, but it just really is a great way to kind of let you kind of push further. It makes it a lot easier to unlock some of the conditions for cards, like far easier than what we see from other deck builder, other roguelikes, where you may not be able to get what you need for that condition until maybe like 75% through, and then it's too late to capitalize on it. Here, once you start winning, you can just try and push for whatever. Hey, if I'm already pulling 5 billion chips every hand, I don't need to buy anything else. Let me just keep raising my interest, raising my money. I'll get the money challenge, or I'll just focus all on jacks now, or all on spades.
Well, it has another effect, which I think is really clever in that, if you're coming into like ante 7 or even ante 6 really strong,
Mhm.
kind of can feel it. You're like, I'm good. I don't even need to pay attention anymore. I got this. And endless being there as a kind of a final test to how far your build would go keeps you in the game. You're like, how much more can I get? Can I add a digit to the scores I'm getting? Because if I can, then I can get X number of more, can I get to ante 18? I've certainly never done.
Hmm. I've only made, I think, ante 10. Like the second we get to like 77 million, that's when it just stops. Like I've yet to have a run break beyond that.
Nice. Yeah, I
And
think I've gotten. I think 10 is where I've gotten as well.
hmm
But I've only done endless like 3 times.
yeah. And it is, I think, a really great like. I think as you were saying, it's kind of like this great way to show off. And I think for like people who stream this game, like it's a really great kind of capper to this run. It's like, hey, we won. Let's push it even further. Let's keep the foot on the gas and see how far this ride will go. And again, it's not something that we normally see from a lot of roguelikes or roguelites. Usually you get to the end of the run, okay, you win, you get the you win screen, we're taking away all your stuff, you're going back to start now. Like, it ends again when your build just peers out. And every build will eventually do that. It just depends on how many extra minutes it's going to take.
Man, I think I just realized something. So in Against the Storm, I never and have never continued to play my settlement.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously in Balatro, it's very clear that continuing has some potential benefits aside from just sort of bragging rights. And I think those benefits also exist in Against the Storm. I should take the occasional settlement, especially one that's in a really good place, and finish it out.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe I'm wrong. Do you think I can accomplish the feats?
That I don't know.
I should look that up because if I can, then I'll definitely do it, right? Because I want more experience.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, I have foxes now.
Nice. And yeah, like it's again one of those things. I'm curious if we will see other developers try and emulate in their roguelikes. This idea of, can we keep someone motivated to play beyond when we say that you win? And like for a lot of them, I think it's very hard to do. But again, like the brilliance of Balatro we've been talking about is that it's very explicit in terms of how a run is going. And when I play something like Beneath Oresa or turning some other deck builders like Runa and so on, it's hard sometimes to tell, okay, am I actually winning? Or, is the next fight just going to completely destroy this deck that I have? Or am I just going to be completely outpaced and over? And like I said earlier, there's a lot of games that have this kind of you win until you lose mentality. And going from win to lose so abruptly, it's very hard to, again, grasp why. But again, like this kind of idea that the progression and how it gets what was it subsequent, I can't even say incrementally, or it keeps getting bigger exponentially. There you go, exponentially gets bigger. It means that you can see very fast, okay, if the ante is 20,000, I'm making 40,000, I'm ahead of the game. If the ante is 30,000 and I just barely broke 30,100, this build, I'm starting to see the wear and tear on it.
Well, I mean, and basically, I feel like once you're starting to get closer to advanced play, your mentality starts to become, can I do this in one hand? Because you
Mhm.
also have to like a money stream is becomes important in terms of sustaining even out to eight. Sustaining it is it's really how much money you have is huge, and so uh, vastly overkill in one hand is the target that you shoot for at the beginning, or not the beginning, but like once you feel comfortable, I suppose. Although I think that brings up a interesting point. Um, there aren't a lot of games out there, and I don't think it's really sort of in the general imagination of us game designers to think about accommodating overkill. So, like, you were talking about enemies that have 800 hit points, but if you do a trillion points, that's like that doesn't make any sense. Well,
Mm-hmm.
how can you make it make sense? What if I can get more reward for killing something, one to the ninth times over?
Mm-hmm.
And that's more reward than killing it one to the eighth times over, right? And these lessons that we can learn from idle games and the way they play more loosely with exponential gain, um, I think is something to pay close attention to. I think we had these thoughts back in the 2004 Spider-Man 2 era where we were trying to we liked the idea. Obviously, we'd played a lot of Oblivion, and uh, we generally felt that it was okay that Oblivion broke down after 150 hours of play. That once you maxed your level out and you had a build of any viability whatsoever, that the whole of the world was no longer going to be of a challenge, and rather you're sort of exploring ridiculous results. Like, can I have 100% invisibility and literally kill every single person in the main city, for example, right? That's obviously
Mm-hmm.
not part of the game's story, and it's not even nice. If you do that, you kind of ruin your save, actually. Um, but it's a fascinating part of the experience that it ultimately supports. And now, how can you gamify that, right? Now, if I overdo it, I get more of a rewards. But generally speaking, that's a bit of a design problem because more rewards often come in the form of overkilling yet more. And so you're like, oh, but what then? Do we just have an infinite amount of rewards that just keep on stacking up? And it's like, yeah, why not? But then if that's the case, then you have to be thinking about that, right? Like, what is the if I finish the game in 6 hours, by the time I get to hour 30, how much overkill is there? And how many upgrades to overkill even more are there? And are there other ways to reward a player for overkill? And I think Balatro has some interesting things to say about that.
Yeah, man, I think it kind of, again, like, it's what we kind of see as like a reverse from a lot of games where the focus is always on the early game. that a lot of people view like late game, end game stuff as the super like less than like 5% of the player base kind of design. Like you're not supposed to be building 80 hours of content for, less than a percent of the player base will overreach it. But I do agree with you that I think it's good to have those conversations about, can we make this appealing? Can we make it fun and enjoyable to say, okay, why don't you take this sword and through upgrades and perks and mods and whatever, now we'll do 80 trillion damage, and it'll, when you slice it, like every tree like just like falls over. And I think as you were describing idle games, I was thinking of something like Disgaea from back in the day, which also had this idea of, yeah, you can play the game traditionally or strategy RPG, or you go over here and go into the item world, and now you what was it? Transmigrate your characters, and then now everyone's at level 9999 doing 5 million damage. I think like the badge of honor from like expert fans of that game was doing like 1 million damage in a single hit, and there is that allure to it that I think a lot of people miss out on. But the difficulty, I think, is guiding someone to that. You mentioned idle games. Like one that I just started playing was 64, which is kind of like idle, like Factorio, or like it's probably more idle than a Factorio. And there's always that problem, I think, of getting someone to understand or getting them to enjoy. Okay, this thing is pumping out 5 cubes a minute. Now you want to do all this, and this, so now it pumps out 7 cubes a minute. And then again, like getting them to feel like, oh my god, I gotta get up to 8 cubes. And again, with something like Balatro, it's very clear. Okay, your first hand gave you 100 chips. Your second hand now gave you 6.7 million chips. Keep it going, keep pushing it.
Yeah. It's I think if we go back 25 years, we have games about overcoming obstacles, and
Mm-hmm.
those obstacles kind of increase linearly in their difficulty, and they give you tools that linearly increase your power.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we've just shifted to recognizing that that's not actually the best way for our brains to work. It is better when it is sort of logarithmic growth. It's something about it feels more natural and more in line with the way our brains work. It's just not what we were expecting, maybe, and so we're still adjusting to modifying all the rules. Like, what if we were to go back and take super ghouls and ghosts and really apply a bunch of overkill rules and being able to do 1,000 times, 100,000 times more than the necessary amount of damage and change the game so that that's actually an interesting thing that could happen. Um, it I'm sure that'd be a very interesting exercise. Actually, my brain is starting to think about it, and I think I'm going to stop because it'll distract me from the other things we're about to talk about.
Yeah, I think like we've seen games go for like the whole new game plus concept. Okay, restart, everything's a little bit harder, and I do feel like it's never really worked for me. Like, I guess for you and for people watching, like, have you ever done like new game pluses in games? Because it just feels like, okay, yes, they're a little bit harder, but if I've already been in the game, what else could they possibly throw at me other than just, okay, now instead of 5 hits to kill this enemy, maybe it takes 8 hits.
Well, I feel like sort of the Diablo slash Grim Dawn model in New Game Plus works really good,
Mm-hmm.
right? It gets you to play the entire story multiple times, shifts your mentality from thinking that it's a campaign that tells a story that finishes, and rather that the story's there just to kind of keep you occupied while you search for the set of loot that will allow you to exponentially grow to hit the next level of super difficult things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, one might go so far as to say that the roguelike genre in its entirety is to say that every game you play is a new game plus, right? It's shrink the and we're not it's like we get caught up in saying that it shrinks the session, but what if that's yesterday's version of the whole game?
Mm-hmm.
And they're just going to do it over and over and over again. And every time you play, new game plus again, right? I think
Yep.
that it's very popular, the idea, I feel like, to old school PC gamers, New Game Plus, that they had a lot of good experiences with it. And that New Game Plus of today is the high octane version. It is so much more. And it maybe just lives and breathes in the roguelike genre.
Mm-hmm. And at some point, we should speak about ARPGs. I would also like to talk about Last Epoch because I find that game like fascinating. Like I think there's a lot of good about it, but it does feel a little bit overhyped to me in terms of like how much of an impact it has on like ARPG design as a whole. And I think a lot of that again, like to bring this back to Balatro, is this idea of making it motivating to break the game. And again, we've been talking about game breaking and like doing this for years now with roguelikes and roguelites. And I don't know, I guess it feels like it's a lot harder than it sounds to make this stuff interesting to do. Because there are a lot of games, like if you watch speedrunners of any capacity, they know how to break these games. They know, okay, if I take this item, I duplicate with this item, and I then put this, I just max my health out in 5 minutes, and then nothing can kill me. And while that, I think that's kind of exciting from like the speedrunners mentality. I just wonder if like maybe it's that kind of issue of how does the general consumer do it that is kind of like lost there. That again, with something like with Balatro, it's you can start very easily drawing these lines between what jokers can do, what the tarot cards can do, and then 1 plus 1 makes two.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I started teaching a game development class at Pasadena Art Center at the beginning of this year, and it sort of and as a result, I've been thinking about things a little bit differently and trying to explain it. The experience of the player is ultimately what matters, right? So that story that the player tells of their play experience is full of things like, "What's that? What's that? How does this work? Maybe that I think it works like this. I'm going to try it. Oh no, that's not how it works. Maybe I don't understand what's going on." Right? It's full of questions and hesitation and misapplied assumptions and all kinds of noisy sloppiness like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you build your experience with that in mind, so that that player is going through those thoughts and that you're building a habitual loop that gets those thoughts to happen, now that's what the game can be about that, right? And now these things that were seem like sort of interesting additions or uh, you know, a particular MMO's approach to end game become part of the DNA of a roguelike that appreciates that. It's something that a small version of that thought happens even when you don't understand the game at all at the beginning. And then that small version of it, of that thought process, grows as you continue to iterate through those sessions and unlocking things and increasing the power your power so that you can get to whatever the main game is, which is ultimately many unlocks down the path.
Mm-hmm. And the unlock thing is another really good point that we haven't spent too much time on. That it does remind me a lot of the Binding of Isaac, in that there are so many unlocks. Now, unlike Isaac, they're not all tied to achievements. Like Isaac has like I think several hundred or several thousand achievements at this point in it, while with Balatro they only have 31, but they have so many different unlocks between the different jokers and the different things you can get, and of course the different difficulties, that it does really again incentivize someone to keep going. And more importantly, I think again, like to the genius of the design, the different challenges will push you to do different things. If you have a challenge that says don't make any flushes, well, how do I do that? Now I have to start looking at doing more with 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind, straights, and all that. If I would challenge that is, okay, I need 30 spades in my deck, how do I facilitate that? And all this does start adding more to what you learn about the rules.
And now playing the game is like moving a vehicle around, and you could take it where you want to. You're
Mm-hmm.
learning how it works, right? There isn't just one way to drive the car, or one place to drive the car, right? You can drive it wherever. It's just that under normal circumstances, you at least kind of have to drive it this particular way to get a win. And until you've done that, that's a good framework for you to like narrow your assumptions about the game at first while you learn the basics.
Hmm.
And then once you've gotten past that, you recognize I could drive anywhere. Oh, and look at all these potential achievements, or at least criteria that need to be fulfilled in order to unlock something, which will then allow me to drive to different places. So then I start driving. I do entire runs that are just about driving to places I was thinking about. I'm just
Hmm.
using this machine, and now it's my machine. I'm not its player, it's my toy. And I
Yep.
think that that's also another pretty good feeling to get going, right? And when
Hmm.
we feel like we have our own control over things, even if it's not true, it just feels that way. That's a good thing for an interactive product.
Yep. And again, like to what I was saying earlier, like Balatro like this rare case of a roguelike where there's more chaos at the start of a run than there is at the end of the run. That it's not so much the chaos in whether or not I'm going to win or lose. It's more, can I make this strategy as singularly optimized as possible? That again, if I'm going to focus on uh, two pairs, if I have like the trousers Joker, then I am going to get every card in my hand except for aces and kings. And how do we keep this going? And again, it's all once again like filtered through this language of poker, so it never gets like overwhelming as a lot of the other ones that we've played. Like even something like with Hades, it can get very easy to get bogged down by okay, the different guide powers and how they relate to each other and how does it relate to my weapon. Here, you never like really like again. Like I've said this, and I think other people said like this is a game about poker, but it's not really about playing poker. Like at some point, the actual act of playing is kind of superseded by the roguelike rules.
Oh, very much so. And I do feel like though, with Balatro, you can hit a wall if you don't start to experiment with heavily constraining what's in the deck.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If you don't go there, if you're a little bit put off by that, or it's a little bit confusing, you're a little hesitant there, you'll start to plateau. You'll have a hard time getting over certain humps because, getting that thing where you only have one or two suits in your deck, right? And you can guarantee a flush over and over again. You can't get to the I know exactly what I'm going to discard. I know exactly the hand I'm trying to create. If you don't get to that point, then it's hard to it's hard to win an anti-8, right? It's like you haven't figured the ropes out yet. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
some people might get bogged down at that point. But
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, I totally agree with what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. So, as another point that we haven't discussed yet, what do you think about the boss designs or the boss blinds? Because this is another thing that I think is very fascinating. That they are designed to be almost as spiky as some of the jokers that you get, and there are cases where you can get that one blind and your run is over. Like if you build your entire deck around face cards and you get the okay face cards have been banned, it's just basically well that's it. Like there's no getting around that.
Well, I think another step that a player has to take, right, is when the first time they look to the boss level and really
Mm-hmm.
understand that the conditions there are something that they need to take into consideration as
Mm-hmm.
they make their choices in the first two blinds. And I think before that, or maybe in roughly the same time frame, you need to also be way more serious about whether you skip or not,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Oh
Like,
yes.
oh, skipping this skip is worth more than if I complete the level on its own. So I
Mm-hmm.
should skip it. Not I should skip it because I can, but because you now understand what you can get out of playing around and that you think that the skip is worth more to you, right?
Yep.
Now you're strategizing. You're really starting to think in terms of Balatro's language and you really starting to like make some guesses about really how far you can go and things start to change, right? And anyone who gets to that point is no longer thinking it's a poker game.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of that has to do with the idea of the scaling jokers, because scaling is your key to the high level play. Like you cannot go in endless mode without having a scaling machine going, and it's at that point where you're going to play every hand, not because you're looking for more money, but because you're looking to keep raising the multiplier, raising the just the amount of chips that you're getting. And if you try to avoid that, it's just never going to end up because again, This is a hard game about numbers. If your number isn't higher than what the game is asking, you lose. Like there's no there's no like getting around that fact.
Oh yeah, I mean, getting big multiplier. Well, anything that there was one where the Joker that's like smaller than the others
Hmm.
that that using a two increases your chips every time,
Hmm.
right? Then using that with DNA, and you just keep getting more twos, and you keep spending more twos, you keep getting more chips, and then you're like, "That's great," and then you're like, "Oh shoot, I can't. That's not going to be enough. I need a way to scale my multiplier too." Right? And
Hmm.
it's like this sort of once you start seeing it all, it feels really good. And it's not more complicated. It's not too complicated, right? It's that there are major categories that you need to be monitoring, and sometimes some of the cards have
Hmm.
difficult to imagine interactions with either the blue or the red. But eventually you'll figure that out.
Hmm.
And in the end, like your strategy is built out of is more simple in nature, right? What is the shape of my deck?
Hmm.
Where are my blue multipliers coming from? Where are my red multipliers coming from? Um, and what hands are the ones that I'm chasing? And ideally, and that can evolve too, right? Because obviously you can't start with like a straight flush style hand. I mean, honestly, I don't know if that's one that you can get to easily, but like flush flush houses and flush four of a kinds and stuff like that are fairly doable because of the way you can duplicate cards and the tarot cards that allow you to turn three cards into a particular suit, for example. Right, those are very viable builds, and maybe I just haven't played enough, and eventually I'll have a straight flush build that happens at some point.
Hmm. Yep. So one thing that we haven't talked about, and as a quick time to we're about 53 minutes, I think we'll go for like another like 10 minutes or so and we'll wrap things up.
Sounds good.
The tarot cards are like the tarot, spectral, and planet cards. It's another, I think, very great way of, again, like trying to control the randomness of your deck. This idea that, again, like you were saying earlier, the thought of removing cards, like that's something that for anyone who's played a deck builder, we know full well in hand, no pun intended, that you need a thin deck. If your strategy hinges on you getting these 7 cards, anything you can do to make those 7 cards pop up more guaranteed is only going to be good. But if you're used to playing like a poker game where you want lots of cards, it can be weird to say, you know what, I just want to delete every heart from my deck. Or maybe for this run, aces are worthless. Maybe face cards are worthless. And there are runs, I'm sure, where it's all about twos. Let me just get a bunch of twos in my deck, and I will break things with a multiplier.
And then the aces become valuable because you can advance them by one into two.
Yeah. But yeah, the tower cards, I think, are just like, again, like, it's a really great kind of use of these different tags, or the different rules of them, to start getting you to think more, again, more advanced about the rules of this game.
Yeah, no, I think well, if we break each of those three systems, and we could probably throw jokers into that system as well. That there's like the
Mhm.
jokers, they're the tarot cards, which I would say that Joker and tarot card is probably the spinal column of the whole machine, right?
Mhm.
Their interactions and the thing that it moves on that spinal column is the shape of your deck or the configuration of your deck. And then you can sort of see the planet cards as like a strict point scaler,
Mhm.
um, with enough variety in that you're rarely going to be super excited about cranking up the level of your pair, for example. Somehow, one pair is like the least desirable of all things, but everything else totally feeds into a strategy, depending, right?
Mhm.
Um, even if I do think that I can't imagine that straight strategies beat out flush strategies because it seems like
Mhm.
there's so many more tools to cultivate a flush-like deck. That
Mhm.
aside, and then the spectral cards are just super cards, right? They are these crazy change everything kind of effect cards. Uh, very very powerful. I think I saw one where it took every single card that was visible to me and turned them into a particular suit.
Mhm.
and I ended up with like 75% of my cards as hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's lucky to some extent, but it's those spectral cards are extremely impactful, at least.
Mm-hmm. And again, like the beauty about this is that every card, for the most part, has some kind of purpose depending upon the build. Like I've had runs where it's like, okay, I have the multiplier for when a face card plays. Now I have the card that gives me more money every time a face card goes up. I have the one that makes face cards trigger twice. And then you have a run where you have no face cards and those jokers show up and they're just basically useless. But
Totally.
again, that's kind of like I think one of the things that we've talked about before, like with roguelike design, there's always this kind of like story of how the run plays out. And that story changes run by run. And oftentimes what makes it very hard, I've noticed this a lot from like kind of the action roguelike side, is making the different runs feel like they're actually viable. That if a run hinges on you always having health, then you always need health cards or health artifacts or whatever, and everything else kind of gets pushed aside because if this is what you need to win, and if you don't get what you need to win, most likely you're going to lose. But
Yeah, yeah. And they're like, but it's okay if you lose because it's quick and you just
yeah,
play again, right?
mm-hmm,
And I think Balatro has some things to kind of make you question, right?
yep,
It makes you not want to give up on a run because if you play enough, you'll have felt it. You're like,
mm-hmm,
oh, I have a strategy. And what it's worth noting, right? The beginning of a run in Balatro is there for you to find a strategy,
yep,
right? You can want any strategy you want,
oh
but it may
yes,
not be in the cards. And
mm-hmm,
and it's actually those runs where you're like, I don't even know how to do this. These cards that are coming up, I don't know how to make sense of them, but you still have to choose something. And maybe, at first when you get in those situations, you just sometimes you maybe even quit or you just lose quickly and you don't even worry about it and you roll back into it. But as you get more experience, right, you'll be like, oh, I guess maybe this means that, and let's say, like in my case, I very rarely pursue like a face card strategy. It's like, oh, so maybe now I'll pursue a face card strategy because of these early jokers that came out, and maybe a particular tarot card, or probably like a planet one, right, where I hit the planet one, and then I get 2 planet cards or whatever, and that changes everything or something. Um, but yeah, now I've learned something about to go back to the driving the car around analogy. It's like I've learned new places that I can go, and since
mm-hmm,
it's a new place that I can go, I'm kind of excited about it. So now I'm on the lookout again. Now it comes up, and I have some choices of things, and it's like I might choose the thing I don't know very well because
mm-hmm,
it's new and interesting place to go. And it's like I've never visited that place. This vacation is going to happen there.
mm-hmm. And like as another really subtle like UI or UX point that I think is really great, that whenever something new shows up, it will always say unobtained or you haven't picked this up yet. So it gives you this idea of I want to fill out my entire collection of everything, so I'm going to try all the new stuff. Maybe it works on this run, maybe it doesn't work, but it gives me as you said, like it kind of starts giving you this like language or this guide as to okay, so this card may completely not work with this deck, but if it shows up again, I have the other cards. Maybe it will be something amazing this time.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you felt it where there's an unobtained card and you're like, I'm just taking it
Yep.
and it's gonna screw my game over.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's fine. Whatever. Yeah, I'm excited to get the new card.
Yeah. So.
You know,
Yep.
one way I like to describe just games in general or interactive experiences in general, maybe any experience, is that there's like an end state that you want to get them to, and what do you do to create or seed that beginning state? And the difference between these two states is ultimately one of just information, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I have an incomplete map at the beginning. And so the information I do get needs to be reduced in scope so that I can make sense of it, but it also needs to point out the places, the things I don't know. And then the act of playing the game fills it in an interesting way.
Mm-hmm.
And then once it's all filled in, I'm at the end state. And maybe there's no true end state for some games, but I think that we can easily describe these roguelike games that are getting good at lots and lots of sessions and lots of unlocks, and that they're these great examples of filling in the information in an interesting way, making like not just allowing you to do things new, rather showing you that there are new things that you can do, and then you being interested in finding or experiencing those things.
Hmm. So I think for my last point, I want to ask you about, and this is something I'm also curious for people who play Balatro can comment down below. Do you think there's any like issues or weak points in the game? I think for me, the one thing that I'm not a fan of, or I think is a little bit like lesser, is kind of like again like what we're talking about is like high level play. So we're like I'm thinking about more about going up the different stakes, and we haven't really talked about the stakes yet, but the different difficulty modifiers, and the game does a really great job with throwing curveballs at you with going from white stake to red and all the way up to gold and so on. But as you go up and up and up, it feels like the RNG at the start becomes far more constrained. I was thinking about this the other day with XCOM, and how in XCOM or in the Firaxis XCOM, basically, like if you're playing that on Legendary, if anything bad happens in like the first month or two of the campaign, you might as well restart because you are that far behind the eight ball. And I kind of felt like Bellagio kind of gets at that point when you're going up the difficulties, where if I don't even see like a rough blueprint of a build by let's say the middle of Ante 2, it just feels like I might as well just reset because I feel like the run is going to just overwhelm me before I can actually get something happening.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, you can totally identify when you're doomed. It's
Hmm.
so true.
Yes.
And that's not. It's okay for not everything to
Hmm.
be perfect. I think that in Balatro, there's already this sort of interesting thing where it starts with high variability and then variability shrinks as you kind of
Hmm.
play longer, right? And that's something that I think a lot of games that handle difficulty, that as they increase difficulty, it just gets more chaotic,
Hmm.
right? And in a lot of cases, that when I see that in a game, I feel like the design of the game wasn't considering those higher difficulties. Rather, they add them because they can, and that it's worth it. That there'll be some players that enjoy that. They become so intimate with the skill of playing the game or the knowledge of the game that
Hmm.
it's an interesting challenge for it to be sort of unfair, right? And that's okay. And that for regular people, they definitely shouldn't play that difficulty because it's actually kind of just punishing for punishing's sake. Whereas much of Balatro's sort of setup is that as you get deeper and as things get harder, that it converges and reduces the uncertainty. I think is really one of its elegant pieces. But that said, that I kind of agree that that difficulty system sort of is more like in the XCOM style than in um, the part of Balatro, which is sort of the drive to big endless.
Hmm. So I think with that, I'm trying to think if there's any other like design points that you can think of for Bellagio before we begin to wrap things up.
Uh, not necessarily that differs fundamentally from a lot of the other great roguelikes out there. Just that it is really well crafted. Um, I feel like Slay the Spire and maybe Monster Train, right? That the sort of the middle of the experience is just nearly perfect, right? That there's all this fun exploration and the kind of the lead up to your first win is really great, and that's not a short experience necessarily, and that it promises to be, that there are multiple achievements down the way to keep me engaged.
Hmm. All right. And yeah, for me, like even with like my nitpick about this, I think this is going to be like a really great game to study in terms of roguelike design. And again, like how do you filter the complexities of different tags, different combinations, modifiers, and make it something that is very easy to understand. And I do hope that developers are taking notes on this in terms again of making this stuff very legible to someone who doesn't understand about how different zombies and beast type cards can interact with the modifier of bleed and and so on and so forth.
Agreed. Yeah, and I mean, I can easily imagine in the future that I'll tend to talk about roguelikes through the lens of Balatro.
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it doesn't have as many sort of idiosyncratic elements to it, and even something like melee combat. It's still that's still a layer that exists on top of the math, and there's like a conceit there, and there's an imagination that there's conflict, and the numbers are fighting each other instead of the numbers are being compared against
Mm-hmm.
each other. Um, and that Balatro is a better example to kind of use it as the measuring stick of others, and not because it's the best, although I think it is extremely good,
Mm-hmm.
more because it is in some ways generic isn't the right word. Universal, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
because it is the most universal.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think that is a good point to end on. We'll need to think about what our next game will be. If we talk about Helldivers, about Last Epoch, or anything else that we've brought up. But yeah, this was, I think, a really great conversation. Hopefully, maybe the stars will align. We can talk to the developer directly about, because there's so many questions I think we have.
Yeah, that sounds awesome for sure. And it was just like kind of a very, very small team, basically, right? Mostly
Yeah,
one guy.
yeah.
That's insane. That guy obviously was effective at studying the patterns that exist under the hood of the genre.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and there's definitely a greater conversation. We do not have the time to get into this tonight about how you can kind of like understanding or like how some of these games just again we still need to have that roundtable about games blowing up. So I think that's a really great conversation because it is I think something that gets lost on a lot of people about how a game like Darkest Dungeon, Balatro, Factorio, whatever, or again like Vampire Survivors, just it can appear like they don't exist and then they exist. I'm again like I played Balatro during the last Next Fest, the demo of it. I was like, yeah, this is a pretty good game. And I had that same feeling like I did with Slay the Spire that it's probably going to do numbers. But again, like it's always hard to tell what happens when it's actually out and people start playing it and covering it. And now everyone's making all kinds of videos about how to get the highest hands, but no, this is the highest hand. No, I have the highest chips. No, this is the best strategy. No, this is my old legendary negative foil polychrome Joker build that got me into the I can't. What's it like? A quintillion, septillion. Just like as again, as
Jesus.
someone who plays IO games, I should know all these designations by now.
I don't anymore. I just know E and a number. Um, but yeah, I think that's a really important point, because also I think you generally find that a lot of the public discourse about these games that blow up really talk about what they think are the obvious reasons why they got big. And as far as I can tell, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that that's never the true reason.
Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure.
There's usually something that is exceptionally well crafted in the experience that is sort of overlooked because it just works so well.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Awesome. With that, we can be done, I guess.
yeah. For now. All right, so we'll end this episode here. So again, Tomo, if you have anything new to promote, game, site, whatever, feel free.
Yeah, well, we're still working on Epic Tavern, although we do hope that this year will come out of early access. And you can find the game's Discord channel at discord.gg/Epic Tavern. And we still occasionally stream development during the week at twitch.tv/Epic Tavern. It's on Steam Early Access right now, and it's been there for a while. A game all about systems and storytelling in a fantasy world.
All right, and we'll be back with another episode of our series soon. And again, if you have a game you'd like us to take a look at, let us know in the comments down below. Do the YouTubing stuff, check out the Discord and Patreon. All support will go towards getting more daily stream happening. So every donation would help and would be greatly appreciated. But with that said, everyone, have a great rest of your night and come back for daily sessions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we some the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.
Bye bye.